Each year, RSF publishes the World Press Freedom Index. It gives a comprehensive look at 180 countries in terms of their performance on press freedom. Some people might be surprised to know that the UK is ranked 35th out of 180 countries. Many would assume or hope that we would be doing better, and indeed we should be doing better. But the UK is an example of one of the democracies that has been sliding in terms of performance in recent years. So this year, on publication of the 2020 index, we highlighted a few trends as being of utmost concern during the year. One is the case of Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks publisher who is currently facing an extradition hearing, will possibly be sent to the US to face 18 counts under the Espionage Act and other charges in connection with his publication of leaked information. Another issue is safety of journalists in Northern Ireland. Last year, we saw the tragic killing of young freelancer Lyra McKee whilst observing rioting in the Cregan area of Derry. But it wasn't just Lyra's killing, it was also the fact that journalists that continue to cover paramilitaries and organised crime remain at great risk in Northern Ireland. And this is all against a broader backdrop of problematic legislation for years. Oftentimes, legislation passed in areas related to surveillance, privacy rights, data protection, or national security have an adverse impact on the ability of journalists to do their job. We've pointed to specific concerns with possible legislation and bills that have passed in recent years, such as the Investigatory Powers Act. This all combines to create a climate that is not ideal for press freedom. By far, the most problematic piece of legislation from a press freedom perspective in the UK since we've opened our office here has been the Investigatory Powers Act. Passed in 2016, it is the most draconian piece of surveillance legislation ever adopted in this country. And in terms of journalistic protections, it lacked protections for journalists, whistleblowers, and other sources. So we're still dealing with the fallout of that as the Act became law and is being implemented. Last year, we raised concern over the counter-terrorism bill, which we were able to suggest some amendments that were successful in the end, but there remain some provisions of that law that are problematic for journalists' ability to do their jobs. So these sorts of bills really make it difficult now for journalists in the UK, particularly investigative journalists, to guarantee source protection. All of that will, over time, have a chilling effect on public interest reporting as sources become less confident about coming forward to journalists. So that is of serious concern. At RSF, we advocate for whistleblower protections because many whistleblowers serve as journalistic sources. There has been a really worrying backlash against whistleblowers in a number of democratic states, including the UK and the US. Cases like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and of course Julian Assange, who is also a publisher. But really this is getting at states' ability to keep information classified, and so they're reacting with a very heavy hand towards those who are exposing public interest information. But our angle from a press freedom perspective is very much the impact that it will have on public interest reporting. So if you look at what came out of leaks like the diplomatic cables that WikiLeaks published, these were stories in the public interest. They were stories about war crimes and other illegal behaviors by governments that are not supposed to act in this way. So what is ultimately at stake over time, beyond the rights of these individuals, which is also of utmost concern, is the public's right to information. The public had a right to these stories. And every time we see an individual made an example of in such an extreme way, for example, Julian Assange faces possibly 175 years in prison if extradited to the US, that will have a chilling effect in the future. That will make publishers think twice about publishing any information that has come from leaks and from whistleblowers, and that should be of concern to everybody. This year, I'm worried that the UK is poised to drop further down the World Press Freedom Index. We've seen some really worrying behaviour from this government since the start of the year. Even prior to lockdown, we flagged what we viewed as Trumpian tendencies towards the press. Number 10 started to change the format and the location of the daily press briefings, started to impose restrictions on who could and couldn't access those. And during lockdown, we saw a really worrying reaction by government to public interest reporting related to the pandemic. Labels like campaigning journalists were thrown around. The number 10 attempted to discredit even a paper of record, the Sunday Times, in response to a piece they had published that was critical of the government's COVID response. So those things were worrying throughout the year. And we have other possible concerns about legislation on the horizon. We're watching very closely what happens with the debate around online harms. Any attempts to regulate the online space must be done in a way that doesn't hinder journalism, and we'll be engaging very closely on that. We also remain concerned about possible reform of the Official Secrets Act. About 2 years ago, there was an alarming proposal by the Law Commission to replace the UK's Official Secrets Act with a so-called Espionage Act that would have made it extremely easy to label journalists and others as spies and to jail them for possibly up to 14 years. That is clearly of serious concern. It also looked at expanding the scope of the legislation to include economic information, leaks about Brexit, and this sort of reporting. Now, there was huge public outcry from groups like Reporters Without Borders, and the debate around that quieted down. There was a public consultation at one point. I don't believe that at any point the government has publicly responded to that, even though it closed more than 2 years ago. And although it quietened down, that threat remains active. We saw some language in the Queen's speech this year that suggests that reform is coming to the Official Secrets Act. Now, the Official Secrets Act should be reformed. It lacks a public interest defence, but it's very disturbing that the UK seems to be looking at models like the US Espionage Act, which also needs to be reformed. It also lacks a public interest defence. We should not continue to look at a country that's tumbling further down the World Press Freedom Index than us as the way forward. And so we will continue to watch that closely and react as merited.